Welcome back to Heartbeats and Footprints. On today's episode, I had a great conversation with Moshe Norman, a licensed clinical social worker in Lakewood, New Jersey, who has a private practice that focuses on individuals, couples, and families using a family system and psychodynamic approach. And to be quite honest, I did not want the conversation to end. It is so full of wisdom and advice that is great for both singles and marrieds. So, welcome, Maishi, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to join this podcast, spread the word, and be able to share so much of what I have developed just in thinking and in practice in really helping couples and families. It's really been a passion of mine for so many years, and it's a great honor to be able to spread this on a broader platform.
You know what? It really is amazing what you do because it is so needed in the community. So, tell us, how did you get started in this? Like, what made you go into this field of all possible fields that you could do?
Yeah. So, I mean, I sometimes chide that when my mother was expecting me, there was like a little peephole in her belly, and I used to peer out and watch and sort of observe people. So I always had this tendency of observing people and observing dynamics and relationships and how people work. And in my high school years, my classmates would call me the marriage counselor of the class. So it sort of was a natural, expected phenomenon that when it was time for me to leave yeshiva. I'd been in Lakewood Yeshiva for many, many years, and the ad popped up that there's a social work course starting. It was just, I turned to my wife and I said, that's me, that's what I'm doing. It wasn't even a question. But
Wow.
the main thing that really got me started was as a child and subsequently as a teenager and an adult, I always struggled with seeing people in pain, and especially in the nature of watching people in relationships struggle and feel alone and feel abandoned. And so often I would think to myself, there's just a real miscommunication that's happening between the two people and how they're understanding and interpreting what's going on between one another. And that doesn't have to be that way. And if only people would understand each other better, then they would feel much more secure in the relationship and subsequently become less distant from each other. And that's really what drove me to going into the work of working with people and dynamics.
That's so unusual, especially for a guy to be so empathetic and at such a young age. I find that really, really incredible and fascinating. So, this is what like you felt your heart is singing like when it comes to this type of stuff. But what makes your type of therapy, your style, different than or unique than others?
Hmm. So that's a good question. There's, especially today, there's so many different modalities and so many progressive ideas and therapy thoughts that have come out and been developed over the years. And I'm sort of a more old-fashioned, old school, what we would call family systems and psychodynamic therapy. Now, psychodynamic therapy really means that we're looking to help a person develop insight into what's really happening beneath the surface and what's really compelling them to behave the way they do and feel the way they do and believe the way they do. And we get into such deep content that they're able to often free that up because they're in a holding, very safe environment in which they can just be as vulnerable with themselves and with the therapist as they need to be. They're able to really get to very deep places. And
Wow.
in family systems therapy, we're sort of doing something very similar, except that instead of it being what we would call intradynamic, meaning me working within my own dynamic, why do I believe this way? Why do I respond to myself with criticism or with whatever it might be? We're doing this now between two people in the dynamic of you and me. So what's happening to you that causes you to respond this way to me or to act this way to me? What's happening to me that causes me to either feel the way I'm feeling or interpret how I'm interpreting or behave my way to you? So it's very similar in that they're both dynamic related, right? They're both parts that are treating each other, dealing with each other, and communicating with each other, but one is intra and one is interpersonal.
That's fascinating. So, do you always meet with, let's say if you're doing couples therapy, you're always meeting with the couple, you don't meet with individuals?
So, it's hard to say always because there are circumstances that call for, for whatever reason for a person to be seen individually. But I think that and that really is called for when somebody needs to work something through that can't be worked out with their spouse. But the predominant driving factor in the therapy is to be able to have the people get into an ebb and flow where they're communicating safely with each other, where things can be shared without defenses being raised, or if defenses are raised, that the spouse will be able to share with that spouse that that's causing me to feel defensive, and for the other spouse to be able to address that properly, in kind, and effectively.
That's so interesting. So, do you think that part of the issue couples are having is that they're not able to share with each other in a healthy way?
Absolutely. I would say that, that the, again, predominant challenge is the ability to communicate with each other openly, wholly, vulnerably. And that can happen for a myriad of different reasons. It can happen because one spouse doesn't make it safe enough for the other spouse to share. It can
Oh,
happen because one spouse has never been given the message that it's safe to share vulnerably, and they themselves don't know how to do it, which will cause, in turn, frustration to the other spouse, who might feel then abandoned or not close. And then people start to turn their heads away from each other instead of leaning in towards each other. And this
right.
creates more and more distance. So, the key, I would say, to a healthy relationship lies in communication, but the ability to communicate is really where things start to get complicated. Why can't I communicate? Why can't we be open with each other? Why are we not safe enough with each other? And that's really where the crux of the work is done in the couples counseling.
So interesting. So, I know you have this course for young, I guess, young married couples. You call it Making Your Bashert. So, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. So making your bashert is a takeoff of finding your bashert, because the belief is that once you find your bashert, you now have to put the work into making your bashert,
Or
and
some
making
people think like once you find your bashert, your work is done.
that's
But
it. You're good to go, and everything's
yeah,
going to
that's
work
it.
out. Yeah, and in reality, you and I both know that it doesn't work that way, and so does anybody
Exactly.
who's married for more than a few weeks or months, right? And what's interesting is that I've been running this workshop for married couples. It's a 5 week course or a 5 week workshop, and it's an experiential workshop versus a didactic workshop, which we'll talk about more what that means. And over the course of the series, I've run it a number of times, and there have been some people who snuck in who were not newlywed couples. They're married for 25 or 30 years and asked if they can join. And what's been such an eye opener for me is that the people who are married for 20 years are more excited about the content and the work than those who are actually only married for 6 months. And
So
so
what
many of them,
why not do this course for couples who are married longer? Why
yeah. And so
specifically for younger?
yeah, exactly. And so now that I've been doing it for this period of time, I'm beginning to believe that it's probably something that I should invite all couples to join, and not specifically newlywed couples, because
Yeah, I'll sign up first.
okay, well, great.
Yeah,
I know you had some exposure to it, so you know what
yeah,
it's about.
yeah.
You've seen some of the work, and the couples are coming back and saying, "We wish that this was around when we were newlyweds, and it's helped us so much more exponentially because we already have so much stuff behind us that this is really helping to repair it." My initial thought was to the contrary. Let's nip it in the bud. Let's have couples learn how to communicate and establish a safe, connecting, deep, meaningful relationship from the get go, lest they have to suffer 20 years of discord and aloneness and things like that. But somehow, Hashem has His ways, and somehow this has become more exciting for those who can really more deeply appreciate it because they can look back and see what they were missing.
Right.
So that's the
Would you give over information a little differently to couples who are married shorter than couples who are, let's say, married for 15, 20 years?
That's a good question, and it's something that I'm in the process of deliberating. I don't have a clear answer to it, but just on a very simple level, some of the content that we address is specifically geared towards newlywed couples. So, for instance, one of the questions that we ask that we have the couple, and this is where we talk about experiential versus didactic. A didactic course would be something that I teach you. It would say, if you and your spouse would spend more time with your phones off and go out twice a week to a restaurant or twice a month to a restaurant and have just alone time, then your relationship will just exponentially become closer and grow.
But
And
we all know that. We don't need you to come teach us that.
exactly. So I do think that there is room for didactic information for teaching, but it's not always true. And here's why. Suppose you and I are in a relationship, whether we're friends or spouses or anything, any kind of dyadic relationship, which means a relationship of two people. And you and I have poor communication. I become very defensive when you say something. I feel like when you give me advice, you're attacking me and saying that I do things wrong, right? And now we go and we turn off our phones for 3 hours a week and we sit down and schmooze and chat, right? So is that really assisting in our relationship, or will we now spend 3 more hours a week bickering, becoming frustrated with each other, etc.? So we can't make these blanket statements that if you would just spend more quality time together, your relationship will blow up and become beautiful, because it's not necessarily the case. We need to do something that's deeper, and that's what experiential means. Experiential means that we actually have the couples in the workshop face each other, share their deepest thoughts and feelings with each other, and then learn how to and practice holding each other. So that if you complain to me about something that you don't appreciate that I do or that I don't do and I ought to be doing, rather than me becoming defensive, fighting back, justifying myself, I practice validating you. I practice hearing your perspective. I practice reflecting back to you what it is that I understand you to be saying and hear you saying. And that's what experiential means. They're actually living the course and living and training in the content and in the process of holding each other and sharing with each other throughout the workshop, not just learning information.
It's so amazing. So tell everybody a little bit, like, how does it work? Like, are there a few couples taking the course at once? Is it live? Is it virtual? How does that work?
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the technicalities of how the workshop works, and then I guess I'll tell you some of the content that's shared
Yes.
so that you can get
Yes.
a sense of what it is. And I know we're talking about the workshop, but as we talk about the workshop, I'm also sharing sort of information, tidbits, and advice as to how people and couples can learn how to improve and be more mindful in their relationships. So
Yeah.
the course is a 5-week workshop, and it has a number of couples together. Now, let's say we'll have 10 couples or 15 couples together in the workshop. It's over Zoom, and all the couples are completely anonymous. What that means is that they sign in with a couple number. Every week you're going to be couple 1, you're going to be couple 5, you'll be couple 8, and you sign in, you log into your Zoom with that couple number. And there's no video or audio from the couple's side. The
Interesting.
only one that they can see is their spouse, and they see me, which is usually in person, and they see me on the screen prompting them and guiding them through the process. Then we take breaks to allow them to do the exercises. And when they indicate that they're finished, and just about everybody indicates that they're finished the exercise, they provide feedback in the chat box with some of that information. And then I share some of the feedback, and the couples are able to then process that feedback. And then they're able to talk about how it was that it felt for them to do the exercise. So let's go through a number of different exercises that the couples do so that you could get a sense.
Yes.
Towards the beginning of the training, let's say in classes 1 and 2, I'll have the couples share with each other, what is it that you wished for or dreamed for in coming into this relationship? What did you imagine and hope for that this relationship would be?
So
Now,
sort of your dreams, your expectations, all
these
that.
expectations, hopes about this relationship. Now, why do I do that? The reason I do that is because there is so much in relationships that are imagined, fantasized, wished, and unspoken. So if you and I have never actually shared with each other what it is that we wish, we can't actually reassure each other. We can't get in line with what we hope. We can't bond in sharing the dream with each other. We can only internally hope and fantasize. But if our spouse doesn't know what it is, it's going to become difficult for them to get those needs met. It's going to be difficult for us to feel connected and together. And so
Right.
when I share with you what I was hoping to get from this relationship is a beautiful connection with somebody who I'll be able to share with and somebody that I'll be able to provide for. And both of those things are meaningful to me, right? That might make you feel closer with me in hearing something like that.
What's the
It,
danger of not sharing, you or not sharing your hopes, dreams, whatever it is?
so the risk of not being able to share that is that you live in isolation. You live
Uh,
with these hopes. On a simple level, let's not talk about the broader hopes and where discussing the broader hopes and dreams that we had and what this relationship will bring us and what it will do for us. But even if we imagine not sharing, I kind of hope that you would be the man of the house and you would, make the decisions and run that. And now I get married to you and you're not the man of the house. You're sort of dependent on me. And that's disappointing. It's a disappointment to me. But if I never share that with you, now I live in isolation. I live with a constant sense of disappointment. I was hoping that I would be able to be the female and be able to be the nurturer, and you would be the man to make those decisions. I was never kind of good at making decisions. I never felt confident about it, or I had this dream because that's how my father was, or that's how my grandfather was, and that's what it is supposed to look like to me, right? And if I never share that with you, now I work in isolation and having to make those decisions that I kind of always hoped you would make, and I feel sad and disappointed. But if I could share that with you, then so many things can happen differently. Number one, if you're mindful that that's a need of mine and you're capable of doing it, you might actually step in more to play that role because you're really okay with it. You're just trying to give me some space and respect. And by you giving me space and respect, I'm not appreciating it because I want you to take that role. That's number one. Number
right. So
two
it's
is
knowing that your spouse is not a mind reader. Like you have to, if you're not sharing with them, how are they supposed to know? Good
correct.
one.
Correct. And number two is the idea of being able to share your innermost feelings and hopes and thoughts with somebody else, and whether it's observing their reaction to it or hearing their reaction to it and how they connect to you, if they're a good holder, if they know how to hold you properly and your hopes and your feelings, that in and of itself brings a great relief and develops a very strong bond and connection. So
Yeah.
there's
When you
something that's
say
happening.
holding, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to go to
Sure.
that. When you say holding, you don't really mean physically holding. You're talking more of emotional,
Correct.
like giving space
I'm not
to it.
excluding physically holding, but I'm
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
specifically about emotional holding, which is the ability to be in the space of what the feelings that your spouse is articulating or expressing, and being comfortable and being okay with that, and even being excited with them or being sad with them when they express those emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So
These are
another
these are great.
Yeah, another discussion that we have once the couples become more comfortable with each other in these workshops is now we have a discussion of potential fears and anxieties that we have in the relationship. So, like, especially for young couples, the fantasy is like this is just bliss and everything's going to be great. But isn't it true that all of us have some disappointments and some things that we find imperfect in our spouse? Or we have anxieties that we bring into marriage. And we learn that anxieties about the relationship can come from a number of different things. They may come from my own unfinished business. So, for instance, a couple shared, or I should say, a spouse shared, that when I was young, my parents would get into arguments and they never resolved their arguments. And I am concerned and anxious that we're going to get into arguments and we won't be able to resolve them, and we'll walk away feeling very disconnected and very anxious of each other. And so one reason that people would experience anxiety in the relationship is because of their own unfinished business. They just don't know that people can actually resolve things. Others may not have that problem. They watch their parents get into conflict and then resolve it, or as some say, they never went to sleep without resolving a conflict, right?
Right. Everybody has a different family of origin, that they come from. So,
Correct. And
yeah.
another reason that people may struggle and have anxieties in marriage is because they know something or they learn something about their spouse that they didn't know beforehand. So they either discovered about their spouse that their spouse had, let's say, anger problems as a child, because by the Vart or the L'chaim or the wedding or the Shava Brachas, people would joke about how he used to be so angry when he was a kid. And that espouses and creates some anxiety. I learned something about you that I didn't know. How do I know that this isn't going to happen between us? Or perhaps they experience something in the context of the marriage that actually happened. They see their spouse being very scattered, and they're becoming very anxious that may adversely affect their relationship. So
Right.
there's numbers of reasons that spouses bring in anxiety in the relationship. And so I have them share with each other. Can you share something that you are concerned about or anxious about your relationship, about your spouse, about yourself? And they now have to face each other and share that.
And
Okay.
do you find that the couples are able to do it? Because if they weren't able to do it before, why would they be able to do it now during this setting?
Yes. So often the reason that they weren't able to do it before was because they were never uh, prompted to do it. They were never asked to do it, or they were afraid to do it. And with some couples, they just were not attuned enough to recognize this. And by me bringing this out, it sort of compels them to tune themselves in. And then it creates the prompt to actually express.
Um,
And because in the context of the course, they're also learning how to hold each other. So they're also practicing how to hear the other person's anxiety without becoming defensive or justify, and instead to lean in to that anxiety and say something to the effect of, I think I can understand why that's a little scary for you. It's a little scary because you never saw conflict being resolved, or it's a little scary because you see some of my flaws and imperfections, or it's a little scary because you know about yourself that you become anxious. You have an anxious attachment style that causes you to feel anxious and insecure in the relationship. And by validating and holding their spouse, it creates more calm and
this
safety.
is such amazing information that you're helping the couples really dig deeper in a way, like you say, you're prompting them, so it makes it easier. So I want to change direction for a second. I'm curious if, I'm a dating coach. So this is what I do. I help people get vulnerable, right? That's the trending word now.
Mhm.
Do you think when couples are dating, if they learned to open up and share a little bit, how would that help them, as a married couple?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point and a great question. Um, one of the things that we had discussed before the show was a question of what would be some advice to give to couples who are dating. You know,
Right.
and I definitely would put on the list to be able to become vulnerable with each other.
So
Many
how do they
people.
go about doing that?
Yeah,
What,
so
what's
many
the,
people have asked me, why don't you give this course or this workshop for couples premaritally, right?
exactly.
And the answer is because there's certain things, there's certain boundaries that aren't broken before marriage. If we have a if we have a couple who is dating and agrees to get engaged and feels happy with each other, now begin to express their anxieties about the relationship, that could create a very great risk for a potential rupture uh, in this engagement process. Oh, they're anxious about this. They're worried about this. Maybe they don't accept me enough. There has to be a certain blind faith in going into a marriage, in finding your bashert and believing that this is the person with whom I feel safe enough and comfortable enough to now create my bashert or to make my bashert. And so that's
What
why,
happens if your anxieties are valid
yes.
once they're engaged? Yeah.
So again, let's slow this down for a moment. The most striking thing that I've experienced in dealing with couples was when I asked the question of what did you see in this person that you married them? Why did you marry them? What did you like about them? Maybe what did you love about them? What was exciting about them? The most striking response that I've gotten too many times was the response of, "Well, I dated them and there was nothing wrong with them. There didn't seem to be anything wrong,
Love
and
that
so
answer.
I said let's get married." And I find that to be very distressing
Yeah.
because unless you have a lot of faith, unless you have really deep faith, you don't marry somebody because there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's just not enough of a reason to marry somebody. Now, some people might argue and say, well, some people are just not the mushy, cushy, deep, meaningful kind of people, and they just need a spouse, and Hashem wants them to have children and to build bayis Nama Israel. And I can't argue with that. We can't impose our values into other people. But I think our discussion today is a discussion of how do we create more meaning and more depth and more connection in
Yeah.
relationships, because that's really where my passion is. If somebody says, well, it was pants and a skirt and we had to get married, then I'll respect that, But I don't think that most people retroactively, are comfortable and happy with that arrangement, because what happens is that if you're not close, you're going to become distant, or you're going to
Right.
become business partners and feel alone. And so I think it's really important, as you're saying, that couples before they're married have to get to a place where there's some degree of vulnerability. And then they need to process with themselves or with someone else, whether it's a dating coach, if they're very self-attuned, it could be with themselves. And in general, it could just be with their parents or people with whom they're close, to say, this is what happened on the date and this is how I felt. There's things I can remember from my own dating process that were so nuanced. They seemed so insignificant, but they had a lot of meaning to me as to what I'm getting myself into, what I am connecting with, who is this person that I will be connecting with, a certain degree of confidence, or a certain degree of insecurity, or a certain sense of rejection or acceptance, that if we just pay close attention and reflect back on what happened in over the course or throughout our dates and the time that we spend together, we can really detect a tremendous amount of nuance that will make us more comfortable or less comfortable. So I would say
Everybody's able to tap into those nuances. Not everybody's as intuitive as you are.
correct. And that's why it's important for them to talk over
Right.
the dating experience with somebody who is older, wiser, or more in tune, who can ask them those questions and be able to. And look, there's also a lot of blind spots in dating as well. If a person or a couple has very poor attachment skills, they're going to potentially fall into something that's specifically bad for them, and they're going to, at that time, be excited about it. So there's those who date people who are, let's just call it for argument's sake, abusive, but feel really, really happy and comfortable and safe and excited. And those people will, in fact, probably marry somebody who will hurt them, unless that can be processed, spoken over with somebody who's wiser and older than they are. And even then, oftentimes they'll still insist, but this is what just feels so good. I'm not going to listen to your advice. Or they will sever the relationship, not get married, but then redo it with another person who, for
They
whatever
have
reason, they feel,
patterns.
yeah, they have negative relational patterns. Exactly.
Yeah. So I know this wasn't really the topic of today, but you brought it up a few times, the attachment styles.
Yes,
Is that something that I know everybody's talking about it? So is that something that you use a lot in your therapy, teaching people what their attachment style is and how it's affecting their relationship?
absolutely. I won't necessarily use the words attachment style, because I want the couple to be able to, I would say that what I really primarily focus on is the concept of mutual understanding,
Yeah.
which means let's understand what's happening in the dynamic between the two spouses. I want you to understand that this is what it really means when I behave in this way. And I want to hear from you what it really feels like. So when you, like I said earlier, when you give me advice or tell me your thoughts, I feel attacked. I feel like you're saying that it's wrong and I'm not smart. I'm stupid for making these decisions. And what if I could share with you that that's how I feel? And you could share back with me, well, I want you to understand that when I give you advice, I actually respect what you have to say and think. And when I give advice, I'm just sharing another perspective with you. And I'm not, in fact, discounting or disqualifying what you're saying. And maybe there's even a part of it that I want to be heard as well. And I want you to acknowledge and value what I say. But I'm not in any way saying that what you're suggesting is wrong, bad, or unwise. So if couples can begin to create that mutual understanding, by me sharing with you what it is that I intend, and by you sharing with me what it is that you intend or how you experience, we can close a tremendous gap that causes us to feel distant from each other.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you keep talking about like the sharing.
Mhm.
So what is the best way for a couple to share? I know it's like everybody's saying like use I statements and all that. What do you say is the best way to share
Mm,
something vulnerable?
right. So I don't know that there is one best way, but I do have different suggestions that we use throughout the workshops.
Yeah, I'd love
Um,
to hear if you could share
so,
some.
so a suggestion would be preempting. I find preempting to be a very, very important skill and strategy in communication. If I know that you might become triggered from something that I say, I might preempt it by saying something to the effect of, "Is it okay if I share something with you? And I understand it might make you triggered or whatever, but my intention is not to make you feel bad or put you down. I just want to do this for the purpose of that we should be able to grow and understand each other better." Another preemptive statement that we use is what I call asking permission. So you might need to be in the mindset to have this conversation or this discussion. I'm bursting. I need to have this conversation with you because I'm feeling so abandoned. And I need to just say to you, I'm feeling so abandoned, right? But if I come into you in poor timing, when you're overwhelmed with your feelings, or you're overwhelmed with tasks that have to get done, or you're simply not in the mood, it's a long day, it's late at night, and you just don't have the cup or the capacity to deal with something like this, it's not going to go over very well. And so asking permission would entail, I'd like to talk to you about something, and I know that it might be a heavy discussion. Is now a good time? Do you have the capacity for it now? Or alternatively, when would be a good time for us to be able to sit down, just with some pure, unadulterated me and you time so that we can hash out something that may be a little bit tough, but hopefully we'll get to somewhere better.
This is such a great tip, by the way. Not just for couples, I think for anybody, but especially for couples, because you're not always going to both be in the mood to share or to have these conversations. So this is great. Like
Mhm.
either ask permission or preempt it. That's a really really good one. So, what's something that you would say that couples should avoid doing? Like whether it's sharing in sharing or anything else. Well, what's some advice you can give couples? Like, don't do this if you want to have a good relationship. Do you have
Right.
anything? Any top tips?
So there's a number of things off the top of my head. One of them is to avoid words such as always and never, because
Yeah,
when you say you never throw things in the garbage, or you never take out the garbage, or you're never on time, that's very dismissive of the person. First of all, it's not true, but even if you
usually
want to
not true.
say, even if you want to say that we use that word colloquially, but I want you to take a moment to just feel the sensation that you get when somebody says you never come on time. There's a very great disqualifier or diminishing towards the person themselves. Okay, so you're saying I never. Okay, so basically you don't have any respect for me, or you completely don't value me at all. There's something
That-
very powerful to the words never and always. You
It's so
can
true.
say, I struggle with the fact that you don't, or you often don't, because saying the truth, in a respectful way, can be helpful. Okay. I encourage couples, this is something that many couples struggle with, the concept of directness. Couples struggle to be direct in what their needs are. And again, this is another area that we spend a lot of time in the workshop discussing. I call it the deep communication, DEAP. It stands for direct, entitled, assertive, and precise. That
Interesting.
when if I want to share something with you as a spouse, I need to feel entitled that I have that right to do so. And when I feel entitled, I need to do it in an assertive way, not
What does
with
that mean though? Because when you say entitled, to me, when I think of like a sense of entitlement, it's a negative thing. So how do you explain that?
the idea of a sense of entitlement has a negative connotation because in later generations people have become over entitled. But
Right.
there is a concept of basic entitlement. Every person is entitled to get their basic human needs met. That is a healthy entitlement. And
Yeah.
in a relationship, right, in life, in the world, we're entitled to food and shelter. right? And those things, and clothes, right? In a relationship, we've committed to each other to give respect and share and provide. And
Uh,
that's a basic entitlement of a relationship. And I shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable or unentitled if you're stepping on my toe, whether that means physically or figuratively, for me to
yeah.
say directly, can you please move over because you're on my toe? And in whatever capacity that is, even if it's figurative, but
Yeah.
I
Just
should feel,
imagining somebody standing on your toe, like literally. It's so
yeah.
funny.
And
Yeah.
again, it's proverbial for being in my boundaries.
Right.
So if I'm on the phone with somebody and you keep interjecting and telling me what to tell them, you're stepping on my toe. You're
Oh, that's
just
annoying.
coming in. You're coming into my boundaries. Yes, I might say it. I might not say it precisely the way you would like to hear it, and you may have said it differently. But I'm me and you're you.
Yeah, I find that that's a matter of like trying to control the person. Like say it this way, say it that way. That's so annoying. Yeah.
Can we take that for a minute? Just let's go on a
Sure.
limb and have some fun with that for a minute. You said it seems like a matter of controlling the person, right?
Well, wouldn't it be? What doesn't it seem like that?
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
But if we were doing mutual understanding, okay, and you would say to me, I feel like you're trying to control me, right? I
Okay.
might share with you that I'm having a different experience of it. I might say, again, this could go many different ways, but I'm going to choose one. I might say, you know, the truth is that I can see why you feel like I'm controlling you because I keep interjecting and throwing myself upon you, and that feels like I'm controlling you. What I want you to understand that what I'm experiencing in those moments is so much anxiety. When you're on the phone and you're talking to this very significant person about a very significant project or detail that we're trying to do, I get so afraid and anxious that you're going to misrepresent something and that the results that we need are not going to be done properly. And so I feel so anxious that I start jumping in and expressing myself. And I probably shouldn't do it, or maybe we could figure out a way, which goes into the concept that we talk about, which is called mutual commitment or mutual agreement, how we're going to go about doing this. That's further in the workshop. We're going to mutually agree on how it's going to work. But I don't mean to control you, and I don't mean to be controlling. I just get so much anxiety when I see that happening that that's what I do. And then, of course, you want to go into mutual agreement. So, what should we do in the future when you have so much anxiety and that's compelling you to behave the way you do?
So I like that. So you're actually going on two things right now. The person is explaining what I felt in that situation, and then it's like sort of like quote unquote Kabbalah al Haasid of what we can do in the future. I love that. That's great.
Yes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's where we get into mutual agreement is, you know, the way that I establish it in the workshop is because you have people who, one spouse yells at the other one and then the other one feels rejected.
Yeah.
So here's the problem. Suppose we have this mutual understanding discussion, you and I say, when I yell at you and I call you names, it's just my childhood trauma. It's remembering my father or my mother calling me a name, and I don't really mean it that way, and I truly adore you and love you and respect you all the time. Um, don't mind it, right? Now, do I really have a right to hurt you that much? What if you said to me, well, I really appreciate understanding that, okay? And I also don't think that I can handle that much abuse or that much pain. So I understand that you're saying that there's meaning behind it and that you don't actually mean it. But if you keep hitting me and striking me, I can't really tolerate that. So
Right.
can we come to some mutual agreement as to what we will do when this begins to occur?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. But so it's kind of like you're taking steps because not discussing it or not telling the person how you feel in certain situations, that's like
That
avoiding.
cultivates that cultivates a lot of resentment,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and a feeling of stuck and disconnect and distance.
Exactly. So these are great tips. So I'd love to hear, you've been doing this a while. You probably have counseled many, many like people and couples. Do you have any stories of like transformation or any good stories that you can share?
Yeah, so I'll tell you two stories.
Okay.
The first is actually not a couple, a married couple, two spouses.
Right.
It's actually between an estranged mother and son, adult
Ooh,
mother and son. So, this kind of systems work is not uh, confined to a married couple. It can be done with families who are struggling with a child or with parents or whatnot, what have you. So there was a couple, a parent and a child, with whom I worked. Um, that was quite a successful story. They hadn't spoken or been in touch for a number of years. The boy was in his high 20s, the mother was 50, and the parents were divorced. They hadn't spoken in many, many years. Very minimal, yes or no questions at best. And the boy was getting a lot of guidance. The boy was a very, very difficult child when he was younger, and understandably, he watched his parents. He watched a tremendous amount of abuse between his parents, and was probably very scared and became very hyper aware and hyper vigilant to things. It was very difficult, very brilliant child, and he came in with his mother and said, "We want better. We want more. We don't want this anymore." And uh, the process was almost, if I had to use the right word, I guess I would say it was extremely delicate, because one of them was very, very explosive. And we had to do a tremendous amount of permission asking and preempting. Is it okay if we do this? What will we do if one of you gets triggered? How will we deal with it in that situation? And the more preparation we did towards each intervention, the easier it became for them to begin to face each other. And over the course of time, um, literally, when they came in, the child had his chair turned sideways so that he wouldn't see his mother. Over the course of time, he began, and he wouldn't talk to her, he would only talk to me as the mediator. Over the course of time, he began to turn his chair more, and then he began to address her directly. The first time that he said you instead of her or she, I wanted to break the champagne,
But
right?
it's so interesting that you noticed that,
Oh,
like
sure. I mean,
the shift. That's
this is what
incredible. It
this is
must
what
be
we
such a good feeling for you.
absolutely. This is what we do all the time. We
Wow.
we we sense and we pay
Yeah.
attention to these little nuances because it was a breakthrough.
Wow.
And then ultimately, uh, what was interesting is people come in with interesting motives. He said, "I don't really care to be in a relationship with my mother at this point. I feel like she hurt me so badly." But he said, "I do want my children to have a grandmother who they love and adores them. And the fact that I was hurt by me doesn't mean that they have to, they shouldn't be able to have a relationship." And ultimately, we were able to get them on very good talking terms. And then the beauty of it was that we worked together for less than a year. And towards the end of that cycle of working together, he actually got engaged to a very lovely girl and got married. And that's when we ended our work. And we processed that the kala coming to her house and the chassan being able to stay in his mother's house with his kala, and it ended up really as a beautiful, um, wholesome, complete. It felt something very, very complete about seeing, the closest natural bond, which is a mother and a child, be able to get back together and get at least close to that place.
Wow. I have a little chills when you're talking about it, because obviously I'm a mother now, I'm a grandmother. So when you first started the story, I assumed he was married. The way you said he wants his kids to have, so he did this even earlier. So that's incredible, and good for you for being able to fix this relationship. That's incredible. So
Mhm.
so that's good. You mentioned you have two stories. I'd love
Yes.
if the second one is as good. I can't wait
No,
to
I
hear
don't
it.
know that the second one is as good because it's just a very interesting trajectory. This actually is a couple that I worked with when they were newlywed, and I was a social work intern. I worked with them, not really knowing much about what I was doing. I mean, obviously knowing something, but not being experienced, I guess would be
Right.
the proper phrase. And they were a newlywed couple expecting their first child, I believe. And so we're talking about 15 years ago, approximately. And uh, they were struggling because, in this particular case, and this is not an uncommon thing, which is that they got married and he was supposed to learn in Kylo for a few years. And after 6 months, he was like, I can't do this Kylo thing. I got to go out and get a job. And the wife was very, very disappointed. And she was, and it brought the inability to properly express and hold the disappointment and the feelings brought to a lot of tension and friction. And the work at the time was really very local. It was the idea that they can share. their feelings with each other, and they got to share back and forth and back and forth and develop that mutual understanding, and they felt somewhat better, and eventually terminated therapy when they felt like things were doing better. I remember at the time he had gotten a job, he was doing okay in his position, etc. Turn forward the clock 15 years later, I haven't really heard from them or seen them over the course of the last 14, 15 years. And I get a phone call just a few weeks ago from this man saying, can I come in? I need to talk to you about something. It's very, very urgent. I said, okay, how have things been? Whatever. We'll talk when I get there. And he came in and said, listen, we've been married for 15 years and I've been making tens of millions of dollars, have a very, very successful operation going on, and I'm having a business crisis. And I know you helped us so much in the past. And I said, what about you guys? I mean, it's been 15 years, right? He said, you don't understand. My wife is my rock.
Oh,
Okay. We're
wow.
so, so close. Everything is, we don't have to even talk to understand each other. We do everything together. She's my greatest support. We're close as ever could be. So, you talk about a couple who was really, really struggling in their first year or two of marriage. You provide them with some of this, I would say tools, but more the ability to just properly feel safe with each other. And again, they each, I'm sure, had their own attachment style challenges where, she was feeling gypped or abandoned by his, not keeping to his commitment and agreement. But they developed the ability to face each other and to hold each other. They're both beautiful, compassionate people. And they just needed that connection to start them off. And that's really what I'm looking to do with my workshop, is to start them off. If they
Yeah.
start off on the right foot, then they'll continue in that trajectory. And it was just so beautiful to hear.
It's amazing. Talk about relationship goals, right? The way he's saying that his wife is his rock, incredible. And it gives couples such chizuk. Look, they were struggling in the beginning and look at them now. But, it's interesting that this story that you said, it just reminded me, it's a question that a lot of women have. I even think it was in one of the magazines a few weeks ago, how somebody wrote in that, the same scenario. Her husband, when they got married, she thought she's marrying somebody who's going to learn for a long time, and then he didn't. And it's a big conversation now. A lot of people are having, like, how should, and not that I'm asking you this, I'm just saying that it's been trending that, sometimes people, like you say, feel gypped. Like, I thought I'm marrying a certain type, and then things change.
Right.
But
So,
there's you see, there's hope.
yes, and I just would say also on that as therapists, we tend to see things from a bit of a different perspective. We don't get us caught up in the nuances of the particular incident that causes the distress as much as we care to understand the source of the distress. So if somebody didn't meet my expectation or
Yeah.
etc., we want to understand what it is that's so devastating for you that this thing is going to happen. It might be a couple who was supposed to learn in Kailul and change their mind. It might be a couple who the wife thought that the husband would make millions of dollars and he's not performing. Or it might be so many other things, like the example I gave earlier with the husband being the rock and the strong decision maker or whatever. What is it behind the scenes that's really happening inside of you that causes this to become a source of internal distress?
That's interesting. So that's why not everybody's a therapist, because not everybody can view things from this point of view. So that's really smart.
And that's why there's no one answer. It's a
Right.
dynamic question.
That's true too. So you gave us so many incredible ideas and tips to think about. But if you had to give, like, one last, like, piece of advice or chizuk or anything that you would want to say as a parting message, what would that
Yes.
be?
So this is what I like to tell couples, all couples, and Mirza Hashem, I hope to tell my own children. I'm at that stage where my own children are looking for their spouses, and what I would tell every couple is to sit down and prepare the following discussion to have with each other just a few months after you're married. And it would be to say, again, to create this mutual understanding and this mutual commitment to the relationship, to say something to the effect of, I want you to know that there might be times that I am not nice to you, not sensitive to you. I might yell at you. I might do things that make you sad or upset or feel disconnected from me. And I want you to understand that even though that happens, it's never my intention And I always respect you and care about you, love you, or whatever adjectives they want to use. And there's stuff that happens that comes up in life that makes me behave that way. It might be my mood. It might be something that happened that day. It might be, some of my old childhood stuff that comes up. It might be my impulsivity. And there are things that cause me to behave in ways that are less desirable than I wish I would. And I want you to understand that it doesn't detract or take away from the way I feel about you just because I do that. So I want you to hold that for now and forever. That's the way I feel about you and towards you, even though sometimes I don't treat you in the way that I should. And both spouses should be able to share that with each other. It creates so much of a relief, a tremendous relief
Yeah.
in the relationship to know that your spouse really experiences you in that way.
So I actually love this a lot. So do you recommend that they say it like in the beginning of their marriage once, or is that something that couples should like say to each other on a constant basis?
Well, I think that the main idea is to have them reassure each other once in the beginning of their marriage.
Yeah.
There may be times that feels or seems challenged. There are times where spouses lose respect for each other, and that may have to be discussed also. But I think that establishing this in the beginning can create a tremendous sense of safety and relief in the relationship. And if the going gets rough over the course of time, for a prolonged period of time, not a one-time incident. One-time incidents will be able to be weathered when this is established. But if things get stressful for a prolonged period of time, this may need to be reiterated or actually may need to be reevaluated if it becomes not true. But
Right.
presumably it's true in the beginning of the relationship, and it may become, unfortunately, not true, and then it needs to be reevaluated.
Yeah. So this was great advice, and everything that you said, in the past hour or so was so spot on. I really love your style, and I just want to end with this: if anybody is struggling in their marriage, or not struggling, if they just want a little more clarity or a little more guidance, reach out to Moshe Norman. I'll have his contact information in the show notes. And, I'll also have information about his course, Making Your Bashert. So thank you so much for your time today, your words of wisdom. And yeah,
It was
so
truly an honor, and I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to spread hope and the good word.
absolutely. I'm sure people are really, really gonna gain a lot from this episode. So thanks again. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me today. I'd love to hear what stood out for you on today's episode. So email me at heartbeatsandfootprints@gmail.com with all your comments. And if this episode resonated with you, make sure to like, follow, and share it with someone who could use some inspiration. Remember, every heartbeat and every step you take brings you closer to the person you want to be. So until next time, keep moving forward and let's continue to grow together.